Thanks very much. I'm hoping it's going to work. The sound's going to work. I didn't get here early enough to test it, but there's a short film I'm going to show. If we don't hear the sound, I'm going to mime it or act it or just make it up as we go along. Slightly frightening. So I've been working on this Skyline project, and it's completely different from what the inspirational project we've just heard about. This is about community and land and the foundational economy and reconnecting people to landscape. I'll explain. And I was looking back at some records, and it goes back over 6 years now. It's taken. I'm still working. I'm still plugging away at this, but it's 6 years. Our photograph is in the upper Ronda. This is Treherbert, and that isn't a Photoshop photograph. That is the high street, and that is the landscape that's behind it. And they're two different worlds. And one of the things we're trying to do is to bridge those two worlds. It's really about land. It's about land and access to land and who get to control how land is managed and for what purposes, about values. And this is a photograph from the top looking south, from the very top of the Rigos. And this is the old Neolithic settlements. Humans have been there using that land, grazing animals, living there for thousands and thousands of years, probably since the ice went. It became private land in the 1500s when this guy, William Herbert, hence Treherbert, was given the land by Edward VI because he looked after it. It was a thank you. It was a thank you. He was given that. His descendants include the Marquis of Bute, who you may have heard of. Bute, and it's the Marquis of Bute that opens up the mines. The Bute coal mine is there. The railway track is built to take the coal down to Cardiff, and the fortune is made. And for quite a brief period, 150 years, we get this intense industrialisation in the valleys. It's only 150 years out of thousands of years of human occupation and human use. What comes afterwards, what comes then now, there are two industries in that valley now. It's wind and it's forestry. And neither of those have any connection to the local community. So the wind turbine is owned by Vattenfall. There is a community fund, but it's crumbs from the table of the money. There's 76 turbines up there, and there's forestry that was planted. That's a view looking across Treherbert over to Cwmsarben. And all forestry planted in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Commercial forestry owned by the Welsh Government Public Estate, managed by NRW. And this is a community which is completely separated, completely surrounded by Welsh Government Woodland Estate, not unlike other communities in the valleys, but has no economic or social connection. When I was doing some of this work, I got talking to a guy who was actually in Merthyr. He'd lived in that valley for 70 years, and he had never been into the woods. He'd never been. 70 years of living in a terraced house in Merthyr. He'd never once been into that woodland. And there's a complete disconnection. It's a community which is a post-industrial community. The coal has long gone. A lot of the factories, the manufacturing industry have gone. You've got the train to Cardiff. I mean, it's got all of the demographic characteristics you expect of post-industrial towns. So the question was, and I was partly inspired by what I'd seen in Scotland, where a lot of Scottish communities had got to own and run and manage the land that surrounds communities. There are now 200 projects in Scotland where communities own the land. 3% of the land area of Scotland is community owned. And that community has the right to say exactly what they want to do with that land, how they run that. Is there something we could do to reconnect parts of that community to that landscape? And that was what was born from this. Was the Skyline Project was a feasibility study that we ran for quite a few years, and it was quite an interesting task. I won't go into all the details. It take a lot longer than this. But you're asking a community, say, who had never thought about it, what would if you had the power, what would you do with the landscape? How would you change it? How would you use it? And that's quite a difficult question to ask. And quite a few people said, well, don't be stupid, don't ask me, they'll never let us. It's, I don't know, interesting question who they is. They'll never let us. And so we had to go about it through meals, through art, through poetry, through using the kids, it took months of building trust and of engaging with the heart before you engage with the head. It wasn't a workshop in a church hall saying, tell me the 4 things you'd most like to see. It was a long process which went through. And what it comes out in the end, it really boiled down to 3 things that the community wanted to see. Wanted to reconnect with the landscape. Top of the list is economy. When that forestry is clear-felled every 40, 50 years, it's the lowest price contractor from out of area who comes in with the guys with the heavy machinery, cuts all the trees down, takes all the stuff away, crawls as a mess, creates opportunities for flooding, and the money goes elsewhere. There's no jobs, there's no connection. The everyday, it's dog walking, it's paths, it's benches, it's a place for kids to play, it's a creative space, it's a place for performance, it's a forest school. Those are the everyday things that people wanted to see. And they also wanted, and this was really important, they wanted a better place for nature. They wanted carbon capture, they wanted more biodiversity, they wanted more in the words of one person we were working with, we want more round trees and less pointy trees, which I think is a very neat way of summing it up. It all was looking quite good. We had Welsh Government were quite interested. We got very close to getting a 20-year, effectively a lease over the 80 hectares. 80 hectares is a lot of land. That's 240 acres, 200 acres of land. For the community to manage, to have full economic rights over that land. The right to harvest, the right to sell timber, the right to process timber, the right to create designated spaces. And for various reasons, which I can tell you about over lunch, not in public recording, that didn't happen. What came out of it, in some ways, is perhaps more interesting, and I think is very relevant to the relationship between the public sector and community. And I'm going to show you that. So what came out of that was, instead of having an ownership or a control as we have in Scotland, as they have in Scotland, we ended up with a process of co-production. So NRW, Welsh Government and the community came together to co-produce what the future of that forest would look like. And so as equal partners, I'll come on to this in a moment, this is not a consultation, this is not NRW coming up with a plan and saying, oh, we come up with this technical plan, here, have a look, what do you think? You know, what around the edges do you want to change? This was a genuine process of co-production, coming together, equal values, negotiating, and it took 10 months. I'm going to show, if the sound works, the community got quite a bit of money from the Climate Action Fund through the lottery, and so because of that agreement about the use of the land, things are starting to happen. As a 4-hectare agroforestry pilot is going to be starting very soon. A social enterprise forestry operation is going to be starting up on the old brewery site, and that's going to be kitted out and started. We've got HE courses in forest management practice starting next September through Neathport, Talbot College and Black Mountains College. The first benches and tracks and trails improvements happened, and it's quite a nice story. We were there actually with some NRW senior staff last week, and the bench had just been fitted. Within 10 minutes of the bench being put in place, a couple who come up through the woods every day with their dog were sitting on it. It was a bench could have been put there 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Why did it take that time, that passion, that commitment, that energy to do that? I think from the co-design process, I've learned a lot of things. It's really a process of building trust. There was a lot, it was mentioned in the film, there was a lot of distrust between the community and NRW. And through what was a 10-month process, it really built trust and really came together. We ended up, I think, with a better plan than either party could have made in their own. So by combining forestry expertise and local values, knowledge, passion, interest, values, and combining those two things, we've come up with a better plan than either party could have done in the future. Now, it doesn't have to be about forestry, it's about land, it's about reconnecting that economy. There's a long way still to go. It's not cheap, it takes time. We needed professional facilitation. You can't just put the community in NRW in a room and hope this will happen. We use Co-Production Network Wales, that some of you will know, to help facilitate that process. They did a very good job of that. And it needs a commitment. It's a long-term change. You know, it's going to be a long time. But I think there's a message there about long-term planning, about co-production, about community and public sector working together, and rebuilding some trust. And in the case of Treurba, about recolonising a landscape which that community has been excluded from for many decades. I will leave you with a quote. There's a Scottish campaigner, Alistair McIntosh, a thinker and campaigner on land rights in Scotland. I actually got him to. He came down to Glasgow, came down from Lewis to Cardiff to speak to one of our Skyline events to members of the Senate, and I think in some ways this sums it up. It means giving responsibility for place, planning and enterprise back to the people who actually live in the place. Thanks very much.